Picture a world where the Earth itself unleashes a cataclysmic flood. Not just rain, but gigantic fountains of water bursting from the deep beneath the crust, reshaping continents in just weeks. Sounds like a blockbuster movie, right? But what if this was the real story of Noah's flood, backed by a bold scientific theory that challenges everything geology textbooks teach? In 1927, Georges Lemaitre dared to say that the universe was expanding. This upended Einstein's static cosmos theory. Likewise, Copernicus, with his radical idea that the sun was the center of our solar system, overturned 1,500 years of science proposed by Aristotle and Ptolemy.
Aristotle, who we thought was so wise, taught that larger objects fall faster than smaller objects. This was the prevailing science for 1,800 years until Galileo dropped two different sized objects off the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Today, even our high school youth routinely support Galileo's radical idea that overturned the 1,800 years of Aristotle's bad science.
Today, we have another radical idea, Dr. Walt Brown's hydroplate theory. It claims that a hidden ocean under Earth's crust triggered a global deluge that explains the mountains, the canyons, and even comets. The strength of any scientific theory is its ability to make scientific predictions that are falsifiable. If I were to create a theory with 10 predictions and get half of the predictions wrong, would that be a good theory? But what if I make 10 predictions and half of them are verified and supported? Would that be a better theory? Dr. Brown has made 57 scientific predictions, and so far 20 of them have been supported by organizations like NASA. Unfortunately, some cannot see the forest for the trees. Here's just one example. A Mr. Brian Lauer gave a PhD university geology professor the 8th edition of Dr. Brown's 448-page science book, which has now grown to 632 pages. She had the book for over 6 months. At the end of that time, Mr. Lauer asked her what she thought about the book. She said,
The science works, if the initial assumption is true. But I don't believe the initial assumption to be true.
so, if the initial assumption of the book is true, then she stated that the science presented in the book works. Many who have honestly read the entire book agree that the science in the book is sound and it does work. Unfortunately, many who object to the book admit they have not read nor studied it. Some, because of their training, finances, career, and position, it seems, do have a problem with the core assumption, the initial condition, so to speak. So what is the initial assumption that she and others have a problem with? Just what is it that they do not believe is true? Water. It's water. More specifically, it's water in the ground. Dr. Walt Brown's book, In the Beginning, Compelling Evidence for Creation and the Flood, presents the hydroplate theory developed with over 45 years of research. This theory posits that a catastrophic global flood shaped Earth's geological features. Its foundational assumption is the existence of a subsurface water ocean beneath Earth's crust, a concept that is supported by modern scientific observations. In June of 1970, while driving from Albany, New York to the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado, where he had just started as a new professor, he tuned into a Christian radio program to stay awake during the monotonous stretch of highway in Kansas.
And where is the real Noah's Ark?
The program discussed reported sightings of Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat in Turkey at an elevation of nearly 14,000 feet above sea level. Skeptical, But intrigued, he initially dismissed the idea as impossible. This was the beginning of his quest for answers. He was amazed at the lack of solid scientific evidence for evolution and the scientific support for creation. Thus, the hydroplate theory begins with a vigorous scientific investigation of over 1,000 references to scientific journals and articles. Let's look at just a tiny portion of the data he uncovered in this brief look at his initial assumption.
9, 8,
To understand
7,
this assumption,
6,
let's go directly
5,
to NASA.
4, 3,
You know,
2,
the people who
1,
spend billions of
and
dollars sending
liftoff of the
spacecraft into our
Cassini
solar
spacecraft.
system. Let's talk about the evidence NASA is discovering in our solar system and compare that with the Bible. In order to do this, we will begin with the fourth day of Creation Week. The Bible says in Genesis 1:16 that on day 4 of Creation Week, God made the greater light, the lesser light, and he made the stars also. You know, those pinpoints of light we call stars included the planets and some of their moons. Any dot in the sky, twinkling or not, was described as a star in this context. What has NASA discovered about those points of light? NASA has discovered 12 objects in our solar system that contain subsurface liquid water. Lots of liquid water. Some of those objects, like Ganymede, have more than 4 times the volume of liquid water as that found on Earth. NASA highly suspects that 7 more objects also have subsurface liquid water oceans. That makes 19 objects in our solar system that NASA says have subsurface liquid water. Here are just some of NASA's drawings highlighting these subsurface oceans. If NASA is correct, then it is logical to assume these moons were initially created with a solid spherical core completely surrounded by liquid water. Over time, these surface waters froze, leaving a thin ice shell on top of that subsurface liquid water ocean. But what does that have to do with Earth's geology, you might ask? On day 1 of Creation Week, Genesis 1 verses 1 and 2 states that,
In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters.
the very beginning of the Bible tells us that the earth had deep water, and this means the earth was completely covered with water. It was a solid core covered with liquid water, identical to the structures observed on those planetary moons today, but without their ice shell. On day 1 of Creation Week, we have the earth completely covered with water, according to the Bible. Day 2 says, paraphrasing here, God said, "Let there be something in the middle of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." Here, the Hebrew word for water is mayim, which means liquid water. Hebrew does have other words for dew, mist, clouds, vapor, smoke, frost, snow, rain, ice, sea, river, spring, well, etc. But they are not used here. It is interesting, though, that modern Bibles translate some Hebrew words as canopy, but that's not used here either. Mayim means liquid water. Let's do a word substitution and substitute liquid water for water on day 2 and see what we get. Day 2 would say, let there be something in the middle of the liquid water, and let it divide the liquid water from the liquid water. Psalms 24 verses 1 and 2 says,
The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. For he hath founded it upon the seas, and established it upon the floods.
God founded the earth upon the seas. Even Peter, in 2 Peter 3:5, speaks of the earth standing out of the water and in the water. Here, the Greek word for water is hudor. Hudor means liquid water. So we have the earth standing out of the liquid water and in the liquid water according to Peter. Peter explicitly tells us what this something is on day 2 of creation week, that is between the liquid waters. Peter says it is the earth that is above and below the liquid waters. Peter is telling us that this something, this firmament, this rakia, this expanse, is the earth. God named this something, this earth, heaven. How can the earth be named heaven? Well, let's provide a possible explanation here. Without going into detail here, for that would be another presentation. These verses support a unified heaven on earth, followed by a separation because of sin, and a new, reunified heaven on earth. It was apparently heaven on earth until the fall. Now, back to the core assumption of Peter referencing the second day of creation week. He tells us that the earth is in the middle of the liquid water, and the earth divides the liquid water from the liquid water. Just how do you put something in the middle of the liquid water and at the same time put it above and below the liquid water? You create a shell, like that of a wet egg, or the skin of a wet apple. The earth is the Lord's, and he hath founded it upon the seas, and established it upon the floods. Let that sink in. Dr. Brown, the evolutionist back in the 1970s, now proposes that this earth, this crust between the liquid waters, was approximately 60 miles thick, and it divided a subsurface liquid water ocean below from the surface liquid waters above. We still have more than 3 times the volume of our surface oceans below ground, which we'll soon see. This was apparently the configuration of the earth at the end of day 2 of creation week, a sphere completely covered with water like the 19 moons NASA has discovered. Now for day 3. Paraphrasing verse 9, and God said, let the liquid waters under the heaven, that's the surface waters, be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. Notice heaven is not capitalized here, and the context indicates the atmosphere. I submit that heaven capitalized in verse 8 and heaven not capitalized in verse 9 are not the same. You will have to decide. Continuing on. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. That's Genesis 1, verses 9 through 10. At some point, Dr. Brown noticed that the physical evidence so far was consistent with the Bible. Just as the archaeologists have and are using the Bible to uncover ancient cities and civilizations like Sodom and Gomorrah, Dr. Brown at some point started comparing his evidence with the Bible and discovered that they matched perfectly. Did you know that the Earth's subsurface waters are still leaking to the surface? Over 2,700 years ago, after the flood, the Bible said there are springs in the seas in Job 38:16. We discovered black smokers and hydrothermal vents on the bottom of the ocean on the 17th of February in 1977. Steve Jacobson and his team from Northwestern University located 3 times the volume of the Earth's surface waters 400 miles below just the continental United States. Imagine if that much water is below every continent and every ocean floor, that would be over 50 times the volume of our surface oceans. We now have the core assumption. There was and is water underground. Lots of water. This is the core assumption that some have not researched and do not believe. It was this subsurface water that covered the earth in Noah's flood. Did floodwaters really cover the entire Earth? Did the waters really come from the Earth's subsurface ocean? Well, the Bible says it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. But after the rain stopped, the waters continued to rise for another 110 days. That water must have come from the subsurface ocean. That granitic crust must have split. The pressure of 60 miles of granite must have caused the subsurface waters to create gigantic fountains of water ejected into the atmosphere and beyond, even ejected into outer space at speeds calculated to be over 32 miles per second or 115,000 miles per hour.
Silence, sir! You go too far!
Let's look at what NASA tells us about Enceladus.
What's Enceladus?
Enceladus is a tiny moon of Saturn. It is tiny, only 314 miles wide. It would fit easily within the borders of Arizona. It has a subsurface liquid water ocean covered with a thin ice shell averaging about 2 miles deep. At a point near its south pole, Enceladus has 4 tiger stripes containing over 100 cracks that are ejecting water. According to the observed data, Enceladus is ejecting between 1.5 and 1.9 million pounds of water every hour. Much of this water is leaving Enceladus and forming the new E-ring around Saturn. The Cassini spacecraft investigated Enceladus's fountains of the Great Deep with 23 close flybys. Cassini actually flew through these fountains of water 7 times. One fly-through was at an altitude of 16 miles from the surface. It measured speeds of the ejected water at 1,360 miles per hour. So yes, the Earth ejecting its subsurface water out at speeds of over 115,000 miles per hour is a very reasonable and conservative number. This is much greater than the 25,000 miles per hour escape velocity of the Earth. It's even greater than the 94,000 mile per hour escape velocity of the Earth-Sun system. Yes, it is reasonable that the Earth could have ejected water, debris into space when the fountains of the Great Deep broke up. Even Europa, a tiny moon of Jupiter, and the very tiny asteroid Ceres are ejecting water in the same way. The Bible confirms physical ejection of water from the earth in Job 38:8. It's almost like God is trying to tell us something. Dr. Brown is no longer an evolutionist because of the data and because of the evidence. I think there is ample evidence that the Earth had a subsurface ocean, just like 19 other objects in our solar system. This subsurface ocean is the foundational assumption of Dr. Walt Brown's hydroplate theory. Remember the geology professor who read Dr. Brown's book for 6 months? Remember that she said,
The science works if the initial assumption is true.
what will she teach you in geology class at the university? Will she teach you that there was a Big Bang? Will she teach you that after the Big Bang, the Earth was a molten ball of magma and lava from meteors and asteroids constantly hitting the Earth? Will she teach you that after millions and millions of years, the magma cooled off, forming a rocky surface? Will she teach you that it rained on the rocks for millions of years, forming all of the Earth that we see today? Will she tell you where the rain came from? Will she teach you that each geological strata layer formed over millions of years? Will she teach you that during these millions of years, only one type of environment existed on the surface, forming only one pure type of rock layer? Then, without warning, almost instantaneously, the environment changed and deposited a completely different pure type of rock as a new and different layer over the next millions of years? Will she tell you where this material for each rock layer came from? Will she teach you that this happened repeatedly and cyclically to account for all the strata that we see today? Will she teach you that particle sorting fits the data much better than millions or billions of years? Will she teach you that running water can produce sedimentation instantly, negating millions of years? Will she tell you about the soil liquefaction or liquefaction? That's where the soil is saturated with water, like during the more than 150 days of the global flood. Here, its footstomps simulate the wave action during the flood. The alternating compression and rarefaction separate the soil particles with water, making the soil into an almost liquid state. The stick in the sand is 4 feet long. Because of the liquefaction, he easily inserted it into the sand. Here we see that lighter, less dense objects rise to the surface while more dense objects sink. This is apparently why different fossils are located in different strata. Fossils and strata are separated based upon weight and size, which is density, time, and magnitude of the liquefying event. Will she teach you that trees stood upright and even upside down for hundreds of millions of years, forming the polystrate fossils, penetrating through many millions of so-called years of strata? Will she tell you that the only place the geologic column can be found on Earth is in the classroom? Will she teach you that coal deposits cannot be over 100,000 years old because of the carbon-14 that is found in them? Will she teach you that radiometric dating can only be used for rocks that we think are so old we can't verify the dates? Will she teach you that seismic studies for the Kola superdeep borehole could not even predict rock formations down to 3.5 miles? But will she teach you that seismology is accurate at depths greater than 4 miles? Will she tell you that her job depends on telling you about millions of years? No wonder she doesn't believe that the assumption is true and that there was and is a subsurface ocean in the Earth like there is on so many other objects in our solar system. Some don't want to see the evidence. Some don't want to hear the evidence. And some, especially, don't want to even talk about the evidence. Is there any wonder then that when they start out with the wrong initial condition, they end up at a scientific dead end? There may be a better answer. It's called the hydroplate theory. Dr. Brown is so sure of his hydroplate theory that he even lists the objections to his theory in his book and answers them. He even compares his theory to other theories. He puts them side by side and references the scientific articles that cover those theories. As we have seen, the biggest objection to his theory is the existence of a subsurface ocean under the surface of the Earth. NASA is showing us that a subsurface ocean is extremely plausible and aligns nicely with the Bible. In 2014, Steve Jacobson and his team from Northwestern University detected massive amounts of water, 3 times the volume of our surface oceans, 400 miles below just the continental United States. Just imagine if that much water is below all the continents and below all the seafloors. So yes, it seems that Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory does hold water. Lots of water. Kind of makes you think, doesn't it? I'll let you decide.